Don't need to give him the big introduction, the big build-up, because you know all about him. Bristol-based, great journalist and broadcaster. Welcome back to the programme. The one and only Tony Gosling. How you doing, T?
Hi, Richie.
Good to have you back, my friend. Before we get into matters coronavirus and matters Brexit, matters Tedros, very interesting, World Health Organization story brewing, I wanted to ask you this. I'd like to throw a question at you out of left field. When people go on national radio and say that they're concerned about something called the Great Replacement Theory, as a woman did on LBC Radio today, and it's caused a big ruckus, saying that white people will be in the minority by the year 2066. Is that just a silly conspiracy theory? Are these people who make these claims racist, or is there more to it than meets the eye, Tony?
Well, you as an Irishman, I'm sure will appreciate the demographics in the north, particularly, which were to do with the Catholics and the Protestants. I think you just got to be realistic about the fact that some groups of people in society, some subsets of people have more kids than others. And isn't it just that simple? The Catholics were having lots and lots of children. And some would say, it's very racist for people to criticise the Catholics for over numbers of decades and even centuries becoming a majority in the north, where actually originally the Northern Ireland was put together when the Protestants were in a majority. So I think you just got to be realistic about these things, not tiptoe around them.
Every sperm is sacred, Tony. That's what we hold dear, us Catholics in Ireland. For anybody who never saw... If only. For anybody who never saw Monty Python and the Meaning of Life, rent it immediately. Finally on that then, and I will move on, I won't press you on it, but those who think, yeah, fair enough, but those who think that agendas that we're looking at agendas unfolding all the time. People who want to transform civilization, to transform the way we live. And there are those who would argue that they've gotten as far as they've gotten because they've been able to divide and conquer people along the lines of ethnic origin, religion, sexual persuasion or whatever. So what about those who say that they believe it's always been a plan to dilute, for want of a better word, countries by allowing unfettered immigration for the sole purpose of turning us on one another? What do you think?
Well, I think there's definitely a massive element of that involved in this economic migration, the migrant crisis, which was really aided and abetted by Brussels through this border force that they had, which just ignored all the mafia trafficking of people from across the Mediterranean mainly, but also through Eastern Europe, Asia Minor, we used to call it, Turkey, around that area. I mean, basically it was a mafia operation. I spoke to a guy years ago, Richie, called, was it Richard Parry? No. His second name was Parry anyway, and I did an interview with him for about nearly an hour about this whole thing. And he wrote a book called The Rift, R-I-F-T, which was all about the economic migration imperatives in Africa, in Central and Northern Africa, that took off after the execution of Gaddafi and the destruction of the Libyan government.
Yeah. And
you can see there's quite definitely an oligarchy's plan there in order to do two things. One is to seed dissent and to feed racism in the home countries in Europe. And the other was most definitely very important to smash pay and conditions and the economic position that people have fought for decades in Europe, particularly here in the UK. You know, we had very strong trade unions in the 70s, and slowly but surely they've been smashed until you've got many workers just don't even think about joining a union, and also the pay and conditions are appalling, like, you know, the 0-hour contracts. So I think there's those main two imperatives behind this, most definitely, but that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't have and shouldn't continue to have good relations with you know, people from abroad, with migrants, because there is definitely an attempt to get working class people or poorer people from both sides, and even the middle class, hating somebody that instead of the actual oligarchy who's behind these actions and behind these policies.
Brilliant answer, that. Brilliant answer. It's Alex Perry's book, by the way. Good man.
Alex, that's him. You got him.
Well, I didn't think of it. I looked it up. I can multitask.
Yeah, I know. I thought you did.
Yeah,
Alex was absolutely brilliant. He wrote a fantastic article for Newsweek Europe. This is must be about 6 years ago now, and it was all about how the mafia were behind the migrant trade. And he'd identified names of the main kingpins that he'd got from the police, but Brussels, and it was mainly Brussels, which was in charge of policing the EU borders, just refused to do anything about it because they're in bed with the mafia. And it's part of their hidden policies in order to create these destabilisations. They love destabilising everything. The more that societies are destabilised, the more you have to go run to them and say, help us, help us. And that was basically their modus operandi, I think, with the migrant crisis and, of course, the financial crisis.
Very good, Tom.
Bailing out the criminal banks, which they did in parallel.
Very good. And I would finish with one point, and then you can come back on it before we talk about the vaccine rollout, which is astonishing me. The coverage is getting. I would make one point. I come from a working class housing estate. I come from a trade union background. I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of the men and women I met over the years, genuine advocates for the rights of workers. And I describe myself as a Bolivarian socialist. That's how I see myself. But I have great sympathy with people from council estates and working class areas whom they're equally as intelligent. They've got just as much intelligence as you and me. But in many cases, they struggle to articulate what they feel, and they see how their areas have changed, and they see the demographic changing in their areas, and they don't know how to articulate how they feel about that and how concerned they are about it, and they end up being left wide open for accusations of racism and xenophobia, and nobody's ever listened to them. And the only people who do listen to them ultimately are the far, far right. And I think we're too quick to call people racist. When people like that woman was very articulate on LBC today when she talked about, her husband is a Millwall fan. He booed the players for taking the knee, and she said he didn't do it because he's racist. He did it because he's concerned about, the changing face of the country and the politicization of BLM. And in 2066, white people might be a minority. It's too easy to call working class men and women racist, and it pisses me right off as a working class man.
The Labour Party did this in spades, didn't they? And that's why they lost the last election. One of the reasons is because they were saying, the Brexiteers are racist. They're against it because they're racist. Well, this is just nonsense. The vast majority of the previous Labour supporters wanted to have Brexit because they were fed up with the rules all being made by Brussels, and they wanted the rules to be made here, and they wanted to be able to get rid of politicians when the rules weren't suiting them, and they just smeared people as racists, and the Labour Party's lost the plot there. But this whole thing about taking the knee, there's another interesting angle to that, is that I've been reading and seeing and hearing some stuff saying that this is a throwback to Canaanite religions back in the Old Testament times. This is the sort of the successors to the Babylonians and people like this. This is one of the things that they used to do. So it is a quasi-religious thing. I think we probably need to do a little bit more digging into that, but it is a little bit like a religion. It's like this whole business of the masks is you're not allowed to just either not wear a mask or choose to wear one or not to wear one. You've got to believe in the masks.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe in the masks, you're some sort of heretic. We're getting into this very strange world where you're not allowed to have your own point of view. And if you do have your own point of view, which doesn't line up with the government, then you're some kind of heretic that needs to be burnt at the stake. Now, this is why I actually do sympathise with people booing at this rather ridiculous posturing with bending the knee. And I've got nothing against people doing it, but it should not be a religious thing. You can guarantee that those footballers have been told to do it. They've got no real choice. They might be pilloried in the papers or sacked if they don't do it. And it should never be part of a game of football, the idea that you've got to sit down and bend your knee. What on earth is that all about?
Very good. And on that theme of religion, the masks becoming religious, the NHS has taken on this image is probably a bad word, this aura of something sacred and holy. And we must never speak ill of it. We mustn't overwhelm it. I tell you what, it's so sacred, it's so holy, we better not even use it.
Yeah, but it's overwhelmed itself, Richie. We just heard the news end of last week that the number of people on waiting lists for over a year has gone up 100 times.
Yeah.
This is literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who are sitting waiting around for basic operations from the NHS. So all the time we were cheering and clapping. So those people were being phoned up and told, don't come in for your hip operation. That basic life treatment to give you some sort of freedom and to keep you going for a few more years. Sorry, mate, you're not having it. So they have actually failed themselves. The NHS has failed.
Horrible story on BBC News website today, bbc.co.uk/news. Horrible story about a young man who's dead now, called Sherwin Hall. Sherwin, God love him, looks like a lovely bloke. He's dead now, and his missus and his baby. 13 visits in 4 weeks in May. He begged for an MRI scan. Begged for one. They wouldn't give him one. They kept turning him away. He died. There were 30 tumours on his lungs, and a tumour in his pelvis. And it's widely believed. And let's give the BBC a little bit of credit. Tony Gosling, by the way, worked as a distinguished journalist at the BBC. He's got mixed feelings, does Tony, about the BBC. But to give the BBC some credit, this is good stuff covering this. This poor man begged for an MRI scan, didn't get it, Tony. He's dead. Gone.
Well, an MRI scan, I don't understand why MRI scans have to be reined back because of COVID. I think, certainly I had one about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And great, it cleared something up for my GP that he was thinking, there might be something wrong with you, Tony, and it turned out there wasn't. But there was absolutely no reason why, we didn't have like 10 people in the room or anything like that. Why are they not just chugging along with these? My main worry about a lot of this, Richie, is that much of the preventative care and the diagnostic care that the National Health Service does has been reined right back because much of the money is going on what they see as a different kind of preventative care, which is vaccines. Massive amounts of money have been going into these gigantic 10 million orders of vaccines of various different types. It seems like they want to have a whole kind of, jelly bean selection of different vaccines that anyone can take. And I'm very suspicious that the priorities, the financial priorities and the resources have all been going into this damn vaccine, and the basic treatments have not been done. And this, of course, fits beautifully with Oliver Letwin and the rest of them's Tory agenda to shut down the National Health Service, to force everybody onto private healthcare, a kind of US system, whereas the NHS had been the best system anywhere in the world. The Tories are hell-bent, I think, on shutting it down.
The French would argue with you, especially my French woman. She'd say it's better in France, but look, that's semantics. Right. Will you, a two-part question, would you take a vaccine? Number one, I think I might know the answer to that. And if moving around freely and going wherever you feel like going is dependent on you taking a vaccine, will you?
Well, I don't think I'll take any kind of COVID vaccine. I certainly would go nowhere near any of these mRNA gene editing vaccines for the simple point that you can see, anybody that bothers to look and see the extent to which the earth-shattering new qualities or non-qualities of these things have been covered up. There's no talking about these being human genetic engineering, which they are. The Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are editing human genes. And there's been no talk about that at all. It's all been covered up. The idea is just trust us. Well, of course, who would want to trust Matt Hancock? But, I've had vaccines in the past, Richie. I would absolutely not. I'm not what you would. They try and brand people like me and you anti-vaxxers. We're not necessarily. I, for example, have quite willingly had a polio vaccine in the past. I've quite willingly had I'm trying to think of the other one, tetanus vaccine. And actually having my conversation with Dr. Stanley Laham in Florida University, he takes a similar approach to me, and the guy's a lifelong immunologist. He's saying, look, there are some really good vaccines out there, some that have really saved lives, but there are also others, mostly the ones Bill Gates has been associated with and his friends in Big Pharma, that the new types that they're trying to get these vaccines mandated because they think that people might not necessarily take them voluntarily. So there have been some in the old days, quite good, very good vaccines, but the modern ones are really trying to piggyback on that to just use them to make lots of money and quite possibly to be used for eugenics purposes. I mean, we've seen, haven't we already, in this whole crisis, the deliberate moving of people without being tested from hospitals into care homes, the elderly, which led to the deaths of tens of thousands of people in those care homes. It was an absolute carnage back in March and April. And so why on earth would we trust them with this decision about this mRNA vaccine? I would go absolutely nowhere near it. And mainly, one of the main reasons is because it's associated with the technologies funded by the Bilderbergers and some of their individuals involved. In fact, it was the Wikispooks site that we reported last week that's come up with something like 12 of the Bilderbergers are directly involved in one way or another with implementing the COVID policy. And what's going on here? This is a global policy implemented by the World Health Organization, whose main funder is Bill Gates, and it's part of the United Nations, which is the process of being privatized. The takeover by the World Economic Forum took place last September, a partnership agreement with the World Economic Forum. So you're talking about the UN being privatized, the World Health Organization being privatized, and Big Pharma rubbing their hands and saying, right, now we're in charge of global health policy, and we're going to make a fortune out of it.
Tony Gosling is our guest this hour, bilderberg.org, thisweek.org.uk, great journalist, Fridays at 5 o'clock. Great radio show. Put links out to it all the time because it's worth listening to, not much worth listening to in this country now. But that certainly is. Before we have a bit of
Can I just say something quickly, Richie, about your show too? I think we've got something in common, actually. It's both of us, when we were finally given the elbow by our mainstream media people, both of us realised why that was happening. And it wasn't because we weren't doing our job. It's because we were actually annoying some rich and powerful people. And when that happens, and when you start to tell the truth, I think it doesn't matter where in the world you're doing it. Say in an African country, if you're doing that, you might get shot. But luckily in our part of the world, we haven't been, and we've been elbowed out. And I certainly sensed back in 1994, when I was elbowed out at the BBC, that I wasn't being removed because I couldn't do my job, that the listeners used to write in my last station I was working on in Salisbury, and say, wow, we really enjoyed this programme. I got nothing but positive feedback, but I was elbowed out anyway. And I knew at the time, this isn't because I can't do it, it's because I can do the job. So I just carried on doing it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're investigating stories we don't want you investigating, Mr. Gosling. They don't say that to your face, of course. It's tragic. One, it's more than tragic. And we will talk next year about what's coming next year, because Ofcom is coming after radio programs like this and yours next year. We talked about this with...
Yeah, bring it on.
Bring it on. 100% bring it on. Before we talk about Brexit, because there's 12 minutes to the top of the hour, we can only probably go till about 6:05. I got another guest in the second hour, and I want to talk a little bit about Brexit with you. Final thing on coronavirus. Hancock said today that maybe the spike in cases down south, maybe the reason for that is they've discovered a new variant or a new coronavirus mutation. Look, I can only deal in facts, and when I'm speculating, I say it's speculation. When it's conjecture, I say it's conjecture, but I get a bit worried when I hear things like that. A new variant. We found a new strain of coronavirus. This is fairly new. It only broke this afternoon. Any response to that?
There are something like 5 different strains around already. I don't honestly believe anything Matt Hancock says. I think the guy's basically a professional liar, a very much much paid liar. And the main thing I think is going on right now, though, is, I think this is basically a distraction. What he's talking about, another load of maybes, is the whole business of getting people access to their parents over Christmas, allowing elderly people to come out of care homes over Christmas. Of course, they've just locked down the whole of London this afternoon on Tier 3. Great, well done. Thank you very much. But we have something now called a lateral flow test, which takes, you get a result in half an hour, and it's 80% effective. So if you combine that with a basic test with a laser of your temperature on your forehead, you have an extremely good, almost 100%, does this person actually have active COVID or not? And that's what we should be doing. Anyone can go into a care home, see their relatives. if they have a lateral flow test and a temperature check, there's no reason why we shouldn't be hugging our loved ones, kissing our loved ones, believe it or not, and actually letting them live, because they are going nuts, some of these people in these care homes, and they've been completely cut off from the very thing that is the most important in particularly in elderly people's and young kids' lives, which is their family love and the family connections. And this is an absolutely appalling thing to do to people at Christmas, just planting them in front of the TV and taking away any family connections. And I think it's actually barbaric. That was a word which was used by one of the health professionals I think she's from Newcastle University. It's barbaric what they're doing. So what they're saying about these lateral flow tests is, oh dear, well, they miss lots and lots of positive tests. No. They miss the PCR positive tests, which are false positives. So it's all very basic stuff. Get rid of the PCR tests, start introducing lateral flow tests and temperature checks, and the country can open up tomorrow.
Well said. Can't add anything to that. Tony Gosling is our guest in the 8-9 minutes we have left. Is Boris Johnson going to sell out the UK's fishermen, and is he going to sign up to a set of standards governed ultimately by the European Union, or laid out by, or set even, a set of standards set by the European Union, basically staying in the European Union or being a member, a satellite state, or Brexit in name only? Is that what we expect to happen before New Year's Eve? So
what you're really asking me there is, do I have more faith in Ursula von der Leyen or Boris Johnson?
Yeah.
That's a horrid question to ask somebody.
Yeah, it's a very quick answer. So he is going to
I don't have any faith in either of them.
Yeah.
But I would say it's more likely that there is establishment pressure on Boris to make sure that we do have a no deal now. The idea really is that the EU I think that if you take a step back from all of this, look at what's happened with COVID. It looks as if the policy has been based on what is politically expedient, right? What is it that the rich and powerful want to do? They will do whatever they want to do, and they don't really care about the financial consequences, because they know that the governments and us are going to bail them out if it all starts going down. Or at least that's the idea. Maybe it will all go down next year. But I think most of the policy is not made on, are people going to survive economically? It's made on what's expedient right now. And I think that the most important thing for Ursula von der Leyen, unelected, failed German politician, now in charge of the EU, and this is the perversity of the EU system, is it picks up all these failed politicians and puts them in charge of the whole show. I mean, how perverse is that? It is that she wants to make sure the whole of Europe gets a very clear sign that you're never going to get a good deal if you decide to leave this club. And of course, everybody will then be looking at this and saying, well, if the Brits get a decent deal, well, maybe it's time for us to leave too, and her club will have to shut down.
Very good. Tony Gosling, and a really bit of interesting news today, which, because there's so much going on around the vaccine rollout, there's so much going on around, obviously, the Brexit, the trade agreement negotiations. Former Liverpool manager Gerard Houllier passed away today. The media, lot to cover. There was scant coverage of something you picked up on, which is a big story. And that is the Director General of the World Health Organization, a guy called Tedros Adhanom, who I never heard of until this year. He's facing charges of genocide, Tony. You were reading this in the Times today.
Yeah, and I would thoroughly recommend, and I can put you in touch with if you want, having a chat with Finian Cunningham, who's another Irish journalist, and he lived down in Tigray up until about a year ago, and he had to move out because things were getting too hot in Ethiopia. He's married to an Ethiopian woman, and we got it chapter and verse from him what's been going on down there. I mean, they've had a few years basically of the Americans interfering in stuff.
Yeah.
There is this thing called AFRICOM. And I always remember somebody on one of the forums I ran, the 9/11 forum, started a thread called, has anyone ever heard of AFRICOM? Well, AFRICOM is part of what's called the Unified Command Structure of the US military that is there to dominate the world. Every part of the world, you've got, you lucky people, wherever you're listening, have got a part of the US Unified Command Structure which is tasked to dominate you. And for example, there's EUCOM, which and there's CENTCOM for the Middle East, and EUCOM and AFRICOM. But anyway, there are I think there's about 8 or 9 for the whole world. So what this guy Abiy Ahmed, he says he's a Pentecostal, like Tony Blair was a Christian, and what he is he's been singling out every single province. Tigray's the last one because they're the most feisty, and he's now trying to subdue Tigray. So there's a whole list, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if this World Health Organization guy is on that list of utterly corrupt US influenced politicians at CIA. Basically, they go over to the United States, they do a kind of CIA course, and they come back and they start running their country. But actually, they're running it for the Americans. This is what it is in a nutshell: is just the more modern form of colonialism. Yeah. So the idea is we're giving power to the African countries after World War II, all the European powers. But of course, we're not. Anyone that starts thinking they're running it gets a bullet in their head, and it's running this way with puppet dictators. And Ethiopia could easily turn into another Yemen. That's the way it's looking like there. If you've got a puppet dictator running the country, the people start trying to get rid of him, then you end up with a kind of Yemen, because the Americans will come in, the mercenaries will come in to back up this puppet president.
What we're seeing there, that's really interesting, Tony, and I'm the first to admit that this program, we don't really focus anywhere near enough. In fact, we don't focus at all on what's going on in Africa. We don't. It probably to the detriment of the program, but it's so difficult with everything going on here and in the US and in Ireland and in Israel and in Syria. But that's fascinating. That what's happening there is basically what they did in Central America, isn't it? But just by other means.
Exactly, yeah. And when you're talking about the guy running the World Health Organization, they will have dirt on this guy, Yeah. So the idea is sign this piece of paper, Mr. Tedros, and otherwise you're going to be in the Daily Mail tomorrow. There are a couple of other things I would really love to talk about, if you don't mind, about an interview I did with a journalist, because this is one of the things I love to do, is get journalists who are really old school types from around the world, like Finian I just mentioned there. And another guy I managed to pin down last week, Richie, was a guy called Roland Perry, who worked in London for years, but he's an Aussie journalist. He's now teaching at I think it's Melbourne University. But he's written some fascinating books. Some of them are fiction, some non-fiction. But his best non-fiction book I have read recently absolutely blew my mind. It's all about the Cambridge spies. And because we had Burgess and MacLean in the 1950s, Kim Philby defecting, and then Anthony Blunt, who was the keeper of the Queen's pictures. He was the fourth man. But there was also always a kind of attempt to find out who the fifth man was. Well, it was Victor Rothschild. It's absolutely clear that Victor Rothschild was the main spy in the Second World War, passing nuclear secrets, Britain and America's nuclear secrets, although he didn't know so much about the American ones at the end of the war, he knew a lot about the British, to Stalin. And Stalin was getting this stuff before Winston Churchill was. His biography of Victor Rothschild absolutely blew my mind. It's called The Fifth Man, and he also turned out to be a fantastically affable bloke to just take us through the Cold War seeing it in a completely different light, with this figure at the top of the British establishment, a peer of the realm, passing all these secrets over to the Russians. And the reason for it seems pretty clear, was that he wanted to get this cachet with Russia to make sure, and the Soviet Union, to make sure that Israel didn't get, because Israel was being supported so much by the United States, not so much by the Brits. But if the Soviets were to see this new state appearing in the Middle East, supported by the United States, then of course they might try and shut it down. But due to the very massive amounts of influence that Victor Rothschild had in Russia, Roland Perry said he was the main individual in the world that made the creation of the State of Israel possible. And I actually take my hat off to the work he's done. And this is one of the reasons it annoys me when people say, oh, you can't talk about the Rothschilds. This is one of the most powerful and important families in history.
In history, yeah. And there's a brilliant article in The Independent going back years, I can't remember, in the 90s, which talked about that, exactly what you said. Rothschild is the fifth Man, do me a favour. We're just about out of time today. I wanted to say something to you before we wrap it up.
Sure.
I'd like to get into that in January. Let's get into that in January. Let's talk about the Rothschild dynasty in a special programme in January. I'd love that. Listen, before I let you go, I try and remember to do this every year. We won't speak again before Christmas. Tell me in a minute whether I know you're on this Friday. I don't know whether you'll be on. You won't be on the following Friday because it'll be Christmas Day. But thanks a million for coming on the programme as often as you do every year. You never ask for anything in return for it. And you bring brilliant commentary, brilliant analysis, and great fact-checking ability, as any great journalist should. And I love having you on the programme. Merry Christmas to you. And thanks for, as I said, all your help this year and every other year too.
Can I wind up with just talking about this, briefly about this book by Norman Baker, this new book out about the Royals?
We've got 2 minutes, T. So you as a broadcaster, you should know.
He is lovely. I absolutely love Norman Baker. He was the one that whilst he was a minister, he brought out a book on the death of Dr. David Kelly, the first really good book on, what was really going on there. Of course, Alistair Campbell, every time I see him on the TV, I just think, yeah, you were one of the ones behind the killing of David Kelly, weren't you? Obviously, Blair was too.
We don't know that for a fact, but we suspect that. Well, I
think yes. I mean, he certainly knows a lot more about it than he's letting on. And it was him that leaked all the information to the press that it was Kelly that was causing trouble, calling it a dodgy dossier and all that sort of stuff. So, anyway, so I think he was most definitely involved in all that, and he could tell a lot more than he's telling on the television when the BBC put him on. But I mean, this book is brilliant. It explains a lot about Charles and his use of the Duchy of Cornwall. I mean, little things like when he had all his duchy stuff that he's selling in Waitrose, everyone was saying, well, actually, this isn't really necessarily, it's just a commercial business and you should be being taxed on all this. And he's saying, oh, well, actually, no, this is the duchy, it's part of the government and it's immune from any kind of tax. And so there was people pointing out that he was just profiteering with this. So what did he do? He sold off the duchy part of the business and he bought the property of the distribution centre for the whole of Waitrose quietly without anyone realising. And this only came out in the Panama Papers. But more importantly, I interviewed a guy last week, Tim Cohen, he's written a book called The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea. And he believes next April, when the Queen retires, and I think this is absolutely on the cards, because when she gets to 95, like Prince Philip, she is likely to retire. That Prince Charles is going to, as everybody knows, that he was connected with the death of Diana, blah blah, and he's not very well liked. Neither is Camilla. That he's going to take on a global role. So how fascinating that he's now getting involved with Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset as one of the people from the UK that's going to be selling the Great Reset to the world. So it looks to me as if he may well stand up in this magnanimous way and hand the royal the throne on to William, but he'll stay as Prince Charles and he'll take on this global role. And what Tim Cohen says in The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea is explosive, is that he will be an Israeli Messiah. I won't say a Jewish Messiah, because many Jews won't accept him. But that seems to me what he wants to be, and that's what Tim told me a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely fascinating idea. And it's a bit of crystal ball gazing, but this is just intelligent guesswork, educated guesswork, Richie.
Very interesting. That's something I want to explore. Hugely interesting. And as you were saying this to me, a very good friend of mine has coincidentally at the same time texted me to say she doesn't believe that he'll be king either. Listen, I meant everything I said earlier on. Folks, Tony Gosling, Bilderberg.org, thisweek.org.uk, Fridays at 5 o'clock from Bristol. Wonderful radio. Thanks for everything this year, my friend. Merry Christmas to you and yours. And I'm sure we'll chat or we'll text or we'll keep in touch over the holiday. And you'll be back in January.
Merry Christmas, Richie, and God bless all your listeners.
Top man T, Tony Gosling, live on the line from Bristol there. Great guy. And again, thanks to him for all his help this year.